Hello and welcome to our Hangout on Air for June 2015. This is our Hangout series from the Sargent Shriver National Center on Poverty Law and the Clearinghouse community. My name is Amanda Moore and I'm the Director of Online Content and Communities at the Shriver Center. And I want to welcome everyone to the Hangout today. I have two guests with me. They're both in New York City. They're on different sides of the East River. I want to first say hello and welcome Sherry Leiwant. She is the co-founder and co-president of A Better Balance. Hey, Sherry.
Hi, Amanda. Hi, everybody.
And in Brooklyn, we have Shawn Sebastian. He's a policy advocate at the Center for Popular Democracy. Hey, Shawn.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
All right, well, Shawn and Sherry are the authors of our Clearinghouse article for June. It's a really interesting piece. Let me get the title exactly correct. It's called Work Schedules and Working Families, Solutions to a Growing Problem. And that's what we're going to talk with them about today, about work schedules and some of the advocacy that's going on around that issue. First, let me do a little bit of housekeeping and tell you how you can be part of the conversation. As our registration email said, Sherry and Shawn really are interested in hearing from you, from hearing from people across the country about what you are seeing with regard to work schedules and your clients. So there are two ways that you can get in touch with us during the Hangout and participate in the conversation. One is through the Hangout itself. If you're watching us through Google+, what you can do is hover the mouse over the left side of your screen, and you'll see a little box there that's blue and says Q&A. If you click that, you'll have a chat box open down the right side of your screen, and you can send us questions that way. Don't worry, you won't appear on screen or anything like that. If you want to go ahead and test that out, that would be great. Just get those communication channels open. You can just send us your name and where you're watching. And we'd love to hear that. The second way you can send us a question, if you're watching us through the YouTube feed on the Shriver Center's YouTube channel, you can still send us questions. You can tweet those to us. So you can tweet us at Shriver Center, and I'll be checking that while we are talking. So if you have a question for Shawn or Sherry, or if you want to share how work schedule issues come up for your clients, we'd welcome any of that. And also, if you want to just tweet to us where you're watching, we'd love to hear from you too. All right, after the Hangout is finished today, we will post the video of this, and anyone who registered will get an email. You'll get a link to the recording of the Hangout, and you'll also get a link to the article that Shawn and Sherry wrote about work schedules. So that'll be nice and handy for you. So I want to jump right in and start talking about your article and about the work that you're doing. Shawn, let me start with you. When we talk about problems with work schedules, what exactly are we talking about?
Yeah, so when we talk about problems with work schedules, what we're actually talking about is a whole constellation of issues, and this is one thing that distinguishes scheduling policies from some other workers' rights policies like the minimum wage. When we talk about the minimum wage, it's at a certain level and it needs to be higher. When we talk about scheduling, we're talking about a whole range of abusive practices that deal with workers' time, and bosses go in and employers can manipulate and abuse workers' time in a lot of different ways. So one of the most prevalent ways is something that's called just-in-time scheduling. So just-in-time scheduling is something that has emerged relatively recently within the last several years, and it's been made possible because of a rise in technology that has coincided with the lowest point in worker power that we've seen in recent history. So employers can micro-schedule people at the last minute and for small hours, and then can adjust even while someone is at work and send people home when the labor needs dip down. So what this means is you can get your schedule just a day in advance. You might need to call in just an hour in advance to find out whether or not you need to come in. So there's abuses going around on-call scheduling. You can have last minute cancellations and cancellations while you're on the job, so you can, have an 8-hour shift, get your bus fare or your gas, get a babysitter, go all the way to work, and then after an hour, your boss tells you need to go, so you lost money by showing up to work that day. And you can have completely unpredictable schedules since you don't have a set schedule. So one week you could be working, mornings Tuesday through Thursday, and the next week you could be working nights Friday through Saturday. So it's a whole range of different issues when we talk about scheduling that all ultimately boil down to people not having control over their time and people not getting paid for their time.
Right. I wanted to say we did have someone, Brian, has sent us a question. It's not really on the subject yet, but I do want to address it. He asked what the hashtag is of the Hangout. So if you want to tag things with a hashtag, you can hashtag Shriver Hangout. If you want to hit us directly with a question, you can send it to @Shriver Center. But I want to follow up on what you were saying, Shawn. So you painted a pretty bleak picture. And that seems like something that's full of a lot of inconvenience for workers. But how exactly does that hamper workers' ability to, especially low-wage workers, to climb the economic ladder?
So these scheduling practices fall the hardest on women and particularly caregivers and mothers. So you can imagine how difficult it is to arrange for childcare when you don't know when you're going to be working from day to day and you have to balance taking care of your child and providing for your child. So given those stresses, it's hard to maintain a job, right? So you can have an on-call shift on Friday afternoons, and 10 times you're waiting by the phone for 10 weeks and you don't get that shift. And then the 11th time your boss calls you in and you say, I'm sorry, I can't find a babysitter. And your boss can say, fine, we're cutting your hours, or fine, you're fired. You can be retaliated against for not showing up, right? So given all of these fluctuations, unpredictability, and general precariousness, it's really hard to keep a job. So then you quit your job and you find another job. So you have people working in retail for 10 years, sometimes working for the same company multiple times, that are still at entry-level positions. So that means you don't get raises, you don't get promotions, and you don't get the opportunity to climb up the ladder and get a job that pays commensurate to your experience.
Right, and I think it's also difficult. I know a lot of people are trying to piece together different low-wage jobs, and it's really hard to schedule a second job if you can't keep a straight schedule for the first job, or to schedule classes if you're trying to improve your education and then climb the economic ladder that way.
That's
Um,
exactly right.
Sherry, the article that you and Shawn wrote, it describes a lot of legislative efforts to curb these types of scheduling abuses. Two of the major ones that you talk about are reporting pay laws and split shift or spread of hours laws. And I'd like to take those in turn and let you talk a little bit about what that type of legislative remedy is, and what the problem is that it's trying to fix. So let's just start then with the reporting pay laws.
Yeah, sure. The reason we focused on reporting pay laws and split shift laws is because they're really the only things on the books that deal with the kinds of scheduling problems that Shawn was talking about. One thing I do want to say about them, they are a powerful precedent for the idea that legislation can address scheduling issues, and many of which have emerged more recently. And I think that they are just a good indication that we should build on what we've got already with these laws, and try to address particularly the unpredictability of schedules, on-call scheduling, a lot of the abuses that Shawn was just describing. The reporting pay laws, there are 8 states in the District of Columbia that have them, and what they do is they require employers to compensate workers who come to work, report to work, that are then sent home either early or not given any work at all. And as Shawn was describing, you've arranged childcare, you've paid for transportation, you show up, and you don't get any compensation, or a very small amount. So the reporting pay laws require a minimum amount of pay whenever you show up, and some of these laws can also be interpreted to require a certain number of hours for each shift. And they are helpful in dealing with the problem of workers showing up and not being paid, or at least they should be. They're not very well known, and they're not very well used. The states that have them, I should just mention, because I think there are people on the phone on the Hangout from different places, are in addition to D.C., Massachusetts, New York, Oregon, New Jersey, California, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. And they're all a little different, but the theme is the same. You should be paid whenever you show up at the workplace. And in terms of the spread of hours or split shift, that's a problem when you have a large number of hours between shifts where you're not getting paid. So you have a spread of hours of 10, 12 hours, but your shifts are only 3 or 4 hours each at the beginning and end of that time. This happens a lot, for example, with school bus drivers in particular, who have an early morning and then pick up shift. But the amount of time in between, there's nothing you can do with that. You can't go to school. You can't do any of the other things that you may need to do. Have a second job. So some states, and this is not very common, but there are two places where that is the case, in D.C. and New York, where you will get an extra hour of pay where you've got that situation. Oh, in California, I'm sorry. So those are two issues that really have been dealt with in legislation, and we're hoping to strengthen those with new laws.
Great. So I don't know if we have any viewers watching right now who are from those states, but if you are, we'd love to hear from you and hear what your experience has been. If you've used a reporting pay law, if you've used a split shift or a spread of hours law, if that's come up for you, we'd like to hear what your experience about that has been. I know this is a topic with a lot of movement right now. I mean, I think it's tied to a lot of other worker campaigns, but there is a lot of movement here, and a lot has happened just since you wrote your article. So I wondered if you could give us a little bit of an update about what's been going on since the article was written, with different efforts around the country.
Yeah, the article does talk about the federal law that was introduced last year in July, and will be reintroduced in the next few weeks. And that law includes a right to request element, which states that you can request changes in your hours, flexible work schedules, schedules that are that really will be good schedules for you, and you can participate in an interactive process with your employer to try to obtain a schedule that works. The federal bill actually expands. Two states have the state of Vermont and the city of San Francisco have passed laws like that. The federal law would also include a right to receive that change in schedule, or the schedule that you want if you're in one of the categories of either a caregiver, someone who is working a second job, someone who needs the change because of education, or someone who has an illness. It can still be denied for a bona fide business reason, but basically the onus would be on the business to show that there was a problem with granting the request. So that's an important element of the federal law, and also, as I say, has been introduced in many states and localities, and has been passed in Vermont and San Francisco. The other element of the federal law is extra pay for on-call shifts, and a requirement of a schedule 3 weeks in advance, or 2 weeks in advance, and a universal reporting pay law that would apply in all states, not just the 8 that I just mentioned. So it's really kind of a model law and a beginning law. But the state, we have seen, and Shawn has worked on the Center for Popular Democracy, where Shawn works, and A Better Balance, where I work, have been working on other laws at the state and local level that expand on what the federal law does, and really address problems like predictability by adding pay when a schedule is changed within 3 weeks, adding more pay even if you're required to call in, or your schedule is changed within 24 hours, and addressing issues also like part-time parity and access to hours. So we're seeing a lot of a lot of thought, a lot of new policy in laws around the country, and I'll let Shawn add to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like Sherry was saying, like a better balance and Center for Popular Democracy and the National Employment Law Project and others have been have been introducing and pushing this idea of scheduling reform in states across the country, and will be pushing it in cities across the country as well. And one other, building off what Sherry was talking about with the existing reporting pay laws, another avenue aside from policy has been the Attorney General of New York, Eric Schneiderman, has used the existing New York State reporting laws to investigate 13 major retailers and their on-call practices. And he's doing that because many employers, particularly in the retail industry, have gamed the system and have avoided paying reporting pay by utilizing on-call. So instead of asking you to show up and then having to pay you, they just call you on your cell phone, or they ask you to call in on your cell phone to find out if you have to work. So it's a lot of these reporting laws are quite old. I know in Connecticut, for example, they were written up in the 1950s before people had cell phones. So the intention of the law was of these reporting pay laws is to pay people for their time, and they're kind of out of step and out of date. So the Attorney General is doing this investigation, which is, in addition to all of the policy that Sherry described, is another avenue that we're trying to push and advocate for scheduling. And the attention that the Attorney General has paid to retailers is something that the Center for Popular Democracy will also be trying to do, like doing corporate campaigns among some of the worst actors in this field in scheduling to try to get them to adopt better policies around scheduling.
Thanks. We've heard from a couple of viewers. First of all, I just want to say hi to David, who's watching in Carthage, North Carolina. So thanks for letting us know that you're watching. And then we also have a question from Brian. Brian wants to know if the passing of the Family Act or paid leave impact these schedule issues.
Well, I would say, I mean, I've been working on family and also paid leave laws around the country. I think that certainly allowing people to take time when they're sick, take time to care for their families, and be guaranteed that they're not going to be retaliated against is extremely important. It's very important. It addresses that issue, that problem of 40% of our workforce not having any paid sick time, only 11% of employers giving paid family leave. So having laws that require those benefits, or not those benefits, really just a basic right, I think, to take care of yourself or your family when you're sick or when you have a new child, are really, really important. But they do not address all of the problems with scheduling, and that's really what I think what we're talking about in this article and here are these being called in without any advance warning, being retaliated against for not being able to come to work, not when you're sick in the places that we've managed to pass sick leave laws, but just because you can't get child care or can't make the arrangement on such short notice. So I think, obviously I think those laws are very important, but it addresses a different problem. Now, in some places that we've been working, in Albuquerque just yesterday, and we're working on these laws in other localities as well, we're combining some of the scheduling protections with paid sick time requirements, and really addressing overall some of the problems particularly working women have, which is my organization's interest in terms of work-family policy. So I'd say they're all important. They're all really important, but you need both.
Thanks, Sherry. I'm glad you brought up what's going on in Albuquerque. Just as a coincidence, we heard from an attorney with New Mexico Legal Aid named Molly, who let us know before the hangout she wanted to explain what goes on with her clients who are migrant workers and having to get up very early, travel somewhere, maybe get picked up for a job, maybe not, and travel time to the site then is not paid. And so she deals with this in a different context from the retail context, which is, I think, a lot of what we've been talking about today. But similar problems of spending a lot more time trying to get work hours in with no stability, no predictability with what's going on. It's always interesting to me to find out how issues like this sort of bubble up to the advocacy level. And I wondered if the two of you could talk about how this issue came to your organizations, how you realized this was something that really needed a lot of advocacy.
Yeah, so actually our co-author, Carrie Gleason, who's the director of the Fair Workweek Initiative at the Center for Popular Democracy, came to this work from organizing retail workers for years, for I believe 10 years. And she saw this major transition happen among the people that she was organizing. So she was organizing JCPenney workers, and they were all, and she was trying to organize them, but they were all people with stable schedules, with predictable hours, who knew when they were going to work. And she saw the transition happen literally before her eyes to a just-in-time workforce that pushed a lot of women especially, and mothers in particular, out of the workforce because they couldn't handle the fluctuating schedules and they couldn't balance that with their family. So I think Carrie saw what was happening in the industry on the front lines among the workers that she was working with, and has been trying to figure out different approaches, policy, legal, and organizing to address this scheduling issue ever since then. So I think that's how it came onto the Center for Popular Democracy's radar, was directly as a result of on-the-ground organizing.
Yeah, and for a better balance, our mission is to support families in their efforts to provide both economic security and care for their family members. So it's really about work-family for us. And the three prongs of what we've always worked on have been paid leave, discrimination against caregivers and against pregnant workers, and also the ability to control hours. And up until fairly recently, that issue has been kind of perceived as more of a white collar issue. The ability of people who are more in offices to kind of control their schedules, to work part time if they need to have time off to pick up their kids at school or to attend events that they need to attend. But again, as Shawn did, we met Carrie about 4 years ago while she was working at the Retail Action Project, and realized that for low-income hourly workers, the ability to control your hours is, as it is with the other issues as well, paid leave and pregnancy discrimination, particularly difficult and really, really almost impossible for low-wage hourly workers. And so we embrace this really as a work-family issue and as a women's issue. And are also trying to explore different ways that we can find solutions legislatively and with respect to policy. So that's where we come from.
Well, thanks. I really like the organizing element of that and how that has tied up with legal work. It's always interesting to see and kind of an exciting development. We are close to the end of our time. These half-hour slots always go by so quickly. So I want to encourage, if any of you have a story to share or a question, now's the time to do it because we're about to wrap up. But I want to ask one more question from me to Shawn and Sherry. A lot of our viewers are frontline legal services, attorneys, and workers. What should they do if they're talking with a client and in the process of talking about whatever issue, if it's employment or otherwise, it comes up that they're having these problems with work schedules? Is there anything they can do? Should they contact somebody else? Should they check for certain laws on the books? What would you recommend?
Well, I think, unfortunately, as I I mentioned before, there aren't a lot of laws on the books, but the laws that we've described in the article are there. So certainly if you're in some of the states that have enacted reporting pay laws or split shift laws, you should definitely be aware of those. There are a variety of laws also on the books that we didn't talk about that do prescribe certain working conditions in terms of limits on hours, particularly for nurses and so forth. So I think it is a good idea to check your labor laws and see if there's anything there that might help your client. As we're working on these issues, both at the federal level and also around the country, we really would love to hear stories. So I think our contact information is in the article, and we'd love to hear from you if you have clients in that situation, because that really helps us. That's what really moves policymakers, and that's what moves the public. And I would, I do a shout out to Stephen Greenhouse at the New York Times, who has really made this a passion of his and did so much writing about it in the Times, and it really did bring the issue to the fore and helped us to at least get the progressive elements in at the federal level to really think about introducing a law. So those stories are really important.
Okay, well, if people want to share those stories with you, then I want to remind everyone you will be receiving an email if you registered for this Hangout, and in that email you'll get a link to the article and a link to a recording of today's Hangout. I'll also be sure to include your email addresses in there so people can get in touch with you with stories, should they have any, or questions. So I'm sure people
and definitely we're always willing to answer questions, and as we're working in a lot of different localities and states. So anybody who is interested in knowing what we're doing or what CBT is doing, please contact us.
Well, we have one more question that just came in. Are there any ways to be proactive reporting employers who abuse scheduling? So can you tackle that from that end instead of from the employee side?
Well, Shawn was talking about what the Attorney General here in New York did with respect to bad actors. If you have a sympathetic Attorney General, it's something to go to them about. I mean, he is the Attorney General in New York is looking at the law in a very realistic way, like what was it meant to do and what's happening on the ground, and going after some of those bad actors with respect to and using the minimum wage law that we have in place in New York. I think letting your Department of Labor or your Attorney General know about what's going on is also something that could be useful depending on how responsive they are to those kinds of complaints.
I wonder if this is anything that, if you had a sympathetic local media source that might be worth contacting as well, for something that was particularly egregious.
Absolutely. I mean, again, those stories are having the public be aware of what's happening, because you go into a store, you don't know that the person who's waiting on you had to like have a child care provider come in at the last minute and is worried about her kid because she couldn't find the person that usually took care of her because she had so little notice of coming in, or whatever problems have arisen because of the bad scheduling. I think most people would be very upset to know of some of the practices, and I think that is what happened with some of the reporting that's been done in the Times and in some other places. So absolutely, that's a great idea, Amanda. I think that's a really good way to really raise the profile of these issues.
Right. And just to second what Sherry is saying, I think this is a form of labor exploitation that has really recently emerged. So a lot of people have no idea about this. So if you can build allies, like Sherry was saying, in your Department of Labor, with your labor commissioner, with your attorney general, with your local representatives, it paves the way for this very new policy that we're trying to push around the country. And then also seconding what Sherry was saying, please be in contact with us if you're seeing this problem come up, because we are in a lot of different jurisdictions. We're in a lot of different states and a lot of different cities, and also we are going to be trying to work with, or work on specific employers' scheduling practices. So whether your client's in a jurisdiction where legislation is moving or your client works for one of these employers, there may be a way to connect him or her to other people in the same boat who are trying to make a change.
Well, thank you. And thanks for your question, Brian. Those were great questions. And I know Wendy Pollock at the Shriver Center has been starting to push this a little bit in Illinois and in Chicago as well. So I know it's coming up all over. Well, we've reached the end of our time. I want to thank everyone for tuning in, and I want to thank you, Sherry, and you, Shawn, for spending this time with us and telling us about what you know and what you've been doing with work schedules. As I've said, everyone will receive an email. You get the link to their article, a link to the recording of this. Also in that email will be a link to register for next month's Hangout on Air. For July, I'll be talking with the team from Voices for Civil Justice. So that's Martha Bergmark, Elizabeth Arledge, and Soren Rasmussen. And they're going to talk to us about what it is that Voices for Civil Justice does and how they can help legal services programs with media work, so messaging and op-eds and getting your work into the press, and how to, if you spot trends such as these work schedules, how you can be most effective at getting those into the press like we've talked about today. That hangout will be on Wednesday, July 22nd, the same time as this one, so 1 o'clock Eastern and noon Central Time. So I hope you'll join me next month as well. So I want to thank you again, Sherry.
Thank you, Amanda, and thanks to everybody who tuned in.
And thank you, Shawn.
Thank you, Amanda.
Great. And so I hope I'll get to hang out with all of you who've watched us today again next month. Until then, thanks a lot. Bye-bye.